This video is brought to you by AmerUSA.com, where you can screen tenants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In this episode, we will be discussing New Jersey landlord tenant laws. The following is a summary of landlord tenant laws in the state of New Jersey as they apply to residential rental property. Topics include disclosures, withholding rent, the right to enter, security deposits, eviction, increasing rent, and more. Required disclosures. Flood zone. Prior to moving in, a landlord must inform the tenant if the rental property is in a flood zone or area. This does not apply to properties containing 2 or fewer dwelling units or owner-occupied properties of 3 or fewer units. Truth in Renting Act. Except in buildings of 2 or fewer units and owner-occupied properties of 3 or fewer units, a landlord must distribute to new tenants at or prior to moving in the Department of Community Affairs Statement of Legal Rights and Responsibilities of Tenants and Landlords of Rental Dwelling Units. Child Protection Window Guards. Landlords of multifamily properties must include information in the lease about a tenant's right to request window guards. The New Jersey Legislature has a suggested notice that can be found at AmericanLandlord.com, where you can copy and paste it into your lease. Security deposit limit. The equivalent of 1 1/2 months' rent may be charged for the security deposit. If additional security is collected annually, the increase may not exceed 10% of the current deposit. It's important to note the landlord is required to disclose the name and address of the financial institution where the security deposit is being kept, along with the type of account, its interest rate, and the amount deposited. Security deposit exemption. New Jersey security deposit laws do not apply to owner-occupied buildings of up to 3 units unless the tenant wants to exercise his or her right to have such laws apply. If so, the tenant must give a 30-day written notice to the landlord exercising this right. Deadline for returning a security deposit. If there was a fire, flood, condemnation, or mandatory evacuation of some sort, the deposit must be returned within 5 days. Otherwise, a landlord must return a security deposit within 30 days after the tenant has moved out. Security deposit interest. New Jersey requires interest to be paid to the tenant either once a year or as a credit off of the rent. Every time the landlord pays or credits the tenant interest, he or she is required to provide the name and address of the financial institution where the deposit is kept, the type of account, interest rate, and the amount of the deposit. Late fees. A landlord may begin charging a late fee after rent is past due. However, if the tenant is a senior citizen receiving benefits such as Social Security, or anyone who is disabled and receiving benefits such as Social Security disability, the landlord must wait 5 days to begin charging a late fee. Increasing rent. Month-to-month agreements require a 30-day notice for any changes. Typically, longer-term lease agreements must govern themselves by mentioning rent increases. However, there are approximately 100 cities and towns, such as Jersey City, Newark, and New Brunswick, with rent control ordinances that dictate when and how much of an increase can occur. Withholding rent. If a landlord fails to provide heat, running water, electricity, adequate sewage disposal facilities, or any other standards of fitness for human habitation, the tenant may pay rent to a court-appointed administrator until the problem is resolved. However, the tenant must first send a certified notice to the landlord, allowing him or her 30 days to correct the issue before the court can intervene. Terminating tenancy and eviction. An unconditional 3-day notice to quit may be used for tenants engaging in disorderly conduct, willful or grossly negligent destruction of the landlord's property, assaults upon or threats against the landlord, termination of tenant's employment with the landlord, conviction for use, possession, or manufacture of an illegal drug on the property or adjacent to it within the last 2 years, unless the tenant has entered rehab. An unconditional 1-month notice to quit may be used for habitual failure to pay rent after written notice, continued violations despite repeated warnings of the landlord's reasonable rules and regulations, at the termination of a lease, or for refusing to accept reasonable changes of substance in the terms and conditions of the lease. The right to enter. A 1-day advance notice is required to enter for inspections and repairs, and reasonable notice is required for all other reasons. For more information, additional laws and articles can be found at AmericanLandlord.com.